5 billion people answer the same call during the World Cup, without orders, without a decree, without any obligation, and that is something that would have deeply disturbed George Orwell. Never in human history have so many people been mobilized by the same thing at the same time. And that thing was a ball. Picture this scene. A man opens a beer in front of the TV somewhere in Brazil. In a few minutes, he will be shouting alongside complete strangers, hugging the neighbor he barely greets in the hallway, and maybe even crying for real if the goal goes in. That very same scene is repeated simultaneously in millions of homes, across dozens of countries, in languages those same fans would never understand if they met each other on the street. Before writing 1984, Orwell was, above all, an observer. Born in 1903, he worked as a colonial police officer in Burma. He lived among beggars in Paris and London. He washed dishes and slept in homeless shelters. In 1936, he volunteered to fight in the Spanish Civil War and was shot in the neck. He came back transformed with one conviction that would shape all of his work. Totalitarianism always begins by controlling collective emotions, by making people feel exactly what those in power want them to feel at the exact moment they want them to feel it. He saw firsthand how a neighbor could become an enemy in just 48 hours, how a word repeated 100 times stopped being just a word and became a trigger. It was this obsession that led him, in 1945, to publish a short essay called The Sporting Spirit, now almost forgotten, yet remarkably precise. The trigger was a tour by the Soviet team Dynamo Moscow through England, which ended in fights, severe diplomatic tension, and matches played on the edge of violence. Orwell went home and wrote a sentence that still carries weight today. Serious sport is war minus the shooting. Let that sentence sink in for a moment. When a game stops being entertainment among friends and begins to represent nations and collective identities, it takes on the emotional structure of a conflict. There is an enemy, there is territory, there are heroes and traitors, there is victory and humiliation, everything that exists in a war except the gunfire, and sometimes even the blood appears. In 1969, a series of World Cup qualifying matches between Honduras and El Salvador culminated in a 100-hour armed conflict between the two countries. Football did not create that war, but it was the spark. What disturbed Orwell was not that rare outbreak of violence. It was the mechanism at work every day, in every competition, the ability to make people who had never met, and who might not even have tolerated each other on the subway, feel like brothers and sisters for 90 minutes. That is emotional engineering, and it only works because there is a symbol at the center of it all. The ball. No object in human history is recognized as universally as it is. Every child, on every continent, in every century, has played with something round. A piece of fruit, a bundle of tied-up cloth, a dented can. The ball has no national origin, it has no ideology, it belongs to no one, and that is exactly what makes it so powerful. Give it any meaning you want, paint a flag on it, and it becomes a homeland. Put a team's crest on it, and it becomes an identity. Place it at the feet of a superstar, and it becomes the projected hope of millions. Orwell understood this before anyone else. The most effective symbol is the one that allows endless projections. The less meaning it carries on its own, the more room there is for everyone to project their own meaning onto it. Most people who have read 1984 remember Big Brother, Room 101, and The Rat. They remember the forbidden love between Winston and Julia, but they forget the book's most disturbing detail, and perhaps the most accurate prophecy Orwell ever made. Most of the people living in Oceania are not kept under control through torture. They are kept busy. They have a weekly lottery, sensationalist newspapers, popular entertainment, and sports. Football is explicitly mentioned in the novel as one of the pillars that keeps these citizens, known as the proles, in a state of complete passivity. The party does not need to oppress them. It knows that as long as they remain hypnotized by the next match, they will never look up and ask who is in charge, how they came to power, or why. When Orwell wrote 1984 in the late 1940s, he was decades ahead of his time, before television, before the internet, before any form of global broadcasting. He saw the outline of something that would only be built on a full scale decades later, and he was not the first to notice it. Around the year AD 100, the Roman poet Juvenal had already given this formula a name, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The Roman people, who had once elected generals and made emperors tremble, had become satisfied with food and spectacles in the Colosseum, gladiators, chariot races, wild animals. The more blood there was, the fewer questions were asked about the corruption at the top. The difference between the Roman circus and the World Cup, however, is crucial, and Orwell was the first to point it out clearly. The Roman circus came from the top down. It was sponsored by those in power. The World Cup is imposed by no one. People paint their own houses, they decorate their own bars, they adjust their own schedules. No one issues a decree. The spectacle is already rooted in the collective desire, as if it had always belonged to that neighborhood. The most perfect form of power is not the one that forces itself upon us. It is the one we eagerly wait for. In 1984 itself, Orwell described a scene that no one forgets after reading it: the 2 minutes hate. Every day, citizens gather in front of giant screens. The image of the party's enemy appears. Within seconds, peaceful and timid people turn into a collective beast, shouting, pounding on their chairs, their faces burning red. And when the screen goes dark, the frenzy disappears. Everyone returns to their desks as if nothing had happened. It is important to make one thing clear. This is not a moral comparison between football fans in a stadium and the citizens of 1984. Fans are not living under a regime of fear. They are not under constant surveillance. They are not forced to do anything. The comparison is structural. The emotional engineering is similar. There is an intense collective emotion. There is a symbolic target, the opposing team that receives the insults. There is a defined time frame, and there is a ritual of release. Singing, jumping, hugging, shouting insults. Everything happens within a specific period in a controlled environment. When the referee blows the final whistle, the frenzy disappears. Everyone goes back to traffic, to work, to everyday life. Orwell goes even further and makes a distinction that most people have never stopped to think about. In Notes on Nationalism, he separates two feelings that seem identical but are actually opposites: patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is love for a real, concrete place, the smell of the neighborhood bakery in the morning, the accent of your hometown, the meal your grandmother used to cook on a particular day of the week. That kind of love does not need an enemy. It exists entirely within the person who feels it. Nationalism is something else. It is identification with an abstract symbol that has to win. It is not love for a place. It is the desire to dominate, to humiliate the other side. A nationalist does not even have to know the country they defend. What they love is not the land. It is the victory of the emblem. And when the national team loses, they feel personally humiliated, as if the defeat belonged to them. The World Cup mobilizes far more of the second feeling than the first. When you walk through the streets wearing your country's jersey, it is not the smell of your neighborhood that is at stake. It is the symbol on your chest. The proof is simple. When Brazil wins, millions of people who have never spoken to one another embrace like brothers and sisters. The next day, they go back to distrusting each other in the elevator. The embrace was real, but it was built on symbolism, not on genuine human connection, and that is why it fades so quickly. The house feels empty again once the guests have gone home. This symbolic layer is also of great interest to governments. Under authoritarian regimes, football becomes a narrative of national pride, a curtain drawn over internal crises. During the 1934 World Cup, Mussolini turned the tournament into fascist propaganda, and Italy won a final, surrounded by suspicions of pressure on the referees. During the 1978 World Cup, Argentina's military dictatorship hosted the tournament, while citizens were being disappeared in clandestine detention centers only a few blocks from the stadiums. Survivors later reported hearing the crowd celebrating from inside their prison cells whenever Argentina scored. The championship ended up serving as a massive screen onto which collective pride could be projected, absorbing for a time the public outrage that might otherwise have been directed against the regime. In democracies, the logic changes in form but not in function. State sponsorships, sports diplomacy, infrastructure contracts, election calendars aligned with the World Cup. The fans celebrate for free. Somewhere else, someone profits with money, votes, and perhaps the most valuable prize of all, public silence during the months when it matters most. But there's another layer to this game that goes beyond politics, a more intimate one, because no one paints their face, cries in front of the television, or hugs a stranger in a bar for entertainment alone. The emotions awakened by the World Cup are far too real for that. They touch a very specific wound of modern life: loneliness. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim, at the end of the 19th century, argued that every society needs moments of collective effervescence, moments when individuals feel they are part of something greater than themselves. In traditional societies, those moments came through religious rituals, harvest festivals, and village weddings, fixed points on the calendar that reminded every person, you are not alone, you belong to something. Durkheim was writing at a time when industrialization was destroying those rituals, cities were growing rapidly, families were breaking apart, neighbors were becoming strangers. He predicted what would come next, an epidemic of loneliness, and it came. Then it grew even worse with the internet, remote work, and the collapse of local communities. Today, a person may have 1,000 followers and no one they can ask to borrow something from. They attend meetings by video call and have no one to eat lunch with. They live in a building with 100 families and do not know the name of a single neighbor. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, 1941, expressed the same idea in different terms. Modern man has gained individual freedom like never before. He has freed himself from hierarchies, rigid social roles, and dogmas, but that freedom came with a burden. Without strong bonds and without a sense of belonging, it produces anxiety. And to escape that anxiety, people will do almost anything, including willingly surrendering their own freedom to any figure, movement, or ritual that promises to restore the feeling of belonging to something greater. The World Cup operates through the same mechanism on a smaller, socially acceptable scale. But it is the same mechanism For 30 days, the person who cannot even name what is missing inside suddenly has everything: a cause, an enemy, a sacred calendar, a uniform, chants, rituals, superstitions, brothers and sisters, millions of them spread across the entire country, feeling exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. There are gods and heretics, promises and miracles. Everything an ancient religion once offered, and that modern secular life has taken away, is condensed into those few weeks. Giving yourself over to that is something deeply human. The challenge is to understand the mechanism while you are still inside it, because there is a difference between being absorbed by the ritual and being aware of the ritual. Both people may watch the same match and feel the same emotions, but one of them understands what has happened. They know that their hunger for belonging has been fed by a system designed precisely for that purpose. And they know that the hunger will still be there after the final whistle. That awareness is what Orwell defended, keeping your eyes open even as emotion moves through your body. There is yet another layer to this mechanism: language. In 1946, Orwell wrote an essay titled Politics and the English Language, arguing a simple but powerful idea. Impoverished language produces impoverished thought. Anyone who gets used to thinking in slogans and cliches loses the ability to see nuance. And anyone who loses nuance loses the ability to judge reality honestly. Turn on any football broadcast for 10 minutes, listen carefully to the language. Everything is binary, short, emotional, our side, their side, war, battle, glory, tragedy. The coach is a general, the striker is a marksman, the rival is an enemy. Every sentence is designed to hit the chest without passing through the mind. Anyone who listens to 4 hours of that every day for a month is gradually being conditioned to think that way. And the danger is that this pattern does not stay inside the stadium. It spreads into politics, into public debate, into the way people see their neighbors, their country, and the world. Everything becomes a team, ours and theirs. No third option, no middle ground, no complexity. Orwell watched exactly this happen through the totalitarian propaganda of the 1930s and 1940s. Entire populations came to think in only two categories: friend or enemy, nothing more. And he left behind a warning that still matters today. Anyone who loses the ability to think with nuance loses the ability to defend whatever freedom they still have. The final piece of this picture is the idol. Imagine a locker room after a match. Outside, the crowd is still celebrating. Inside, sitting on a bench, still wearing his soaked jersey and football boots, a player covers his face with his hands. He has just scored the winning goal. For 90 minutes, he was a national hero. Now he cries alone where no one can see him, because next week, the entire country will expect exactly the same thing from him, with exactly the same intensity. And then the week after that, month after month, year after year, until the day he fails. On that day, the very same people who worshipped him will write that he is finished. On the other side of the city, a child tapes a picture of that same player into a school notebook and whispers his name under their breath as if it were a prayer. In The Hero with 1,000 Faces, 1949, Joseph Campbell showed that every human culture creates figures like this. The hero is a psychological necessity. Ancient societies had Achilles and Hercules. Religious societies had saints and prophets. Modern societies, emptied of myths, transferred that role to the football superstar. And of all modern idols, the football player may be the most heavily burdened, because they reach the greatest number of people and awaken the most primitive emotions. That is why so many end their careers struggling with depression, addiction, or personal ruin. They were carrying a symbolic weight that no human being can bear. Behind the pitch lies a massive economic infrastructure, global sponsors, broadcasting rights worth billions, partnerships with clothing brands, beverage companies, car manufacturers, and increasingly, betting platforms. Every goal is, at the same time, a sporting moment and a commercial event measured in advertising revenue. Every camera, every angle, every replay, all of it is designed to maximize tension. And in this equation, tension is worth money. The plan is not hidden, it is right in front of you. But in the middle of the euphoria, no one is looking. Human attention is a limited resource. When it is consumed by spectacle, there is less left for everything else. The result is practical: important votes, political scandals, major structural reforms. They all pass quietly while the country debates lineups and penalty kicks. No censorship, no decrees, no need to hide anything. It is enough that no one is paying attention. Where there is no attention, there is no outrage. Where there is no outrage, there is no pressure. Where there is no pressure, nothing changes. The cycle closes on its own. But there is an even deeper layer, perhaps the most honest of them all. The collective euphoria of a World Cup victory is one of the most intense experiences modern life has to offer. When the goal goes in, strangers embrace. Adults become children again for a few seconds. Neuroimaging studies show that moments like these activate the same brain circuits associated with love, music, and profound pleasure. And for many people, it is the only time all year when something truly touches their soul. The problem is not the euphoria. The problem is when it becomes the only thing. When the other 11 months and a few extra days of the year are filled with traffic, credit card bills, pointless meetings, eating dinner alone with a phone beside you, and restless nights. When everyday life becomes so empty that the month of the World Cup turns into the only island of meaning. Without realizing it, the person spends the entire year living for those 30 days. If you have made it this far, you have probably felt for some time that something is wrong, that modern entertainment is too vast, too intense, too synchronized to be innocent, that there is an invisible mathematics behind every global spectacle. Orwell wrote for people like you, not for the masses. The masses were watching the next match. He wrote for the individual who cannot surrender completely, the one who feels a quiet mental disturbance while everyone else is cheering, the one who senses that something is being orchestrated even without knowing exactly what. People like that often feel out of place in the middle of collective euphoria. Sometimes they're called bitter, cynical, boring. But clarity and bitterness are not the same thing. Open eyes are not closed to joy. They are simply eyes that notice the pattern while it is unfolding. Yet clarity has its own danger, a danger Orwell himself warned about: contempt. The danger that someone who recognizes the mechanism begins to believe they are superior to those who do not. To look at the neighbor wearing the national jersey with a faint smile and think they are being manipulated. That is the shortest path to becoming exactly the kind of person Orwell despised most, the cold intellectual who mistakes awareness for moral superiority. Anyone who loves the game is responding to a genuine human need. Ritual, shared emotion, belonging. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem is failing to recognize the system through which that need is being channeled. And recognizing the system does not mean despising the people who are part of it. It means seeing clearly without losing empathy. The French philosopher Guy Debord gave this phenomenon a name in The Society of the Spectacle, 1967. For him, the spectacle is not a collection of images. It is a social relationship mediated by images. People stop relating to one another directly and begin relating through what they consume together. Even inside a stadium, where the experience should be as direct and tangible as possible, a goal is recorded by 1,000 smartphones before it is fully seen with people's own eyes. The solution Orwell proposed did not require heroism, nor did it require rejecting football. It required only an inner witness, an observer who remains awake while everyone else celebrates. That observer does not ruin the embrace. It does not diminish the joy. It simply keeps alive, in the background, the awareness of who you are, what you are feeling, and why. During the next World Cup, try this. Observe not only the game, but yourself within it. Notice your heartbeat speeding up, the urge to shout, the impulse to hate the rival, the sudden desire to hug a complete stranger. Do all of this without suppressing it, without pretending it is not there. Just observe. That small act, repeated during great collective moments, is the most practical way to apply everything Orwell wrote, without a book in your hands and without theory filling your mind. The final whistle worth listening to is not the referee's. It is the one inside you, the one that sounds when you realize you can love the game without losing yourself in it, that you can belong to the tribe without being swallowed by it, that you can feel everything while still remaining in command of your own attention. That, Orwell would say, is the only victory that truly matters. No anthem, no medal, nothing at all. A victory that takes place within your own consciousness, and one that no one can ever take away from you.